I'll catch it. I'll just,
You may.
amplify that, I'll show
Yeah, I'll move the chair. Do you want the chair to sit down?
TBD.
Tag you. Yeah, because I have papers. I have my questions here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine.
The mics are hot.
Yeah, I didn't write any questions
before.
out, so. All right, let's do that. Do we want to be a little closer to that? Do you want to turn that maybe?
Whoop, careful there.
Yeah. Not my first time this week.
And I have one last question.
Yeah.
We had talked about doing this as a fully interactive session.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting to the end for questions, just let people stick their hand up and ask.
All right. I do need a question, Mike. Question, Mike? Oh, you just got four?
Just shout.
We do the questions. We'll make them shout there. It's a small room. Which one's the worst? I'll come and take one of the mics and one.
They're SM58s, they bounce well.
You guys ready? All right. Hello, hello, hello. How everyone's doing? Yeah, everyone enjoyed the last presentation there? All right, all right. Dr. Spafford, get his book. It's in the store. I'm happy to announce a nice panel here. We're going to do a fireside chat on highly regulated industries, threats on the horizon, and planning for the future. It's going to be led by Amy Cabaria. We also have Paul Neff, Bruce Phillips, and Paul Rice here. So a big warm of applause. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Amy. Thank you.
Hello. I'll just kick off introductions. You heard our names, but I'm Amy Cabaria. I am an attorney. I started out. I've been working in highly regulated spaces and with those laws and regulations for a long time now, in combination with data privacy and security. Around 10 years, I started out at a prominent health industry advisory practice at a law firm. I'm a data privacy professional, data privacy and security professional as well, and currently leading AI governance efforts. Everything I say today, however, is not about any one company specifically, and no legal advice. Nothing that I say is legal advice, so just a quick disclaimer there, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Amy, and it's a pleasure to share a stage with you again. Hi, everybody. My name's Paul Neff. I am currently the Chief Information Security Officer of the Wisconsin Department for Public Instruction, which is the Department of Education in Wisconsin. So it's a great gig. It is one that I'm coming to green because I am now 4 months in K-12 education, capstoning over 25 years in the U.S. financial sector, most of which was spent in 6 different roles in the Federal Reserve System, including operational cybersecurity roles as well as regulation and policy. And I'm here today primarily because I've worn that regulatory hat for so long. That career was capstoned when I went to the U.S. Treasury for a couple of years, where I directed the Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection. That is the Sector Risk Management Agency for the U.S. financial sector. And we grappled with some of the questions that we're probably going to touch on today. But I'm really pleased to be here. And I just met you, my fellow panelists, so I'm going to have to ask you to introduce yourself. I need 3 or 4 repetitions to get names.
There we go. Good morning. My name is Bruce Phillips, also known as TBD. I'm the Senior Vice President, Chief Information Security Officer for the Williston Financial Group of companies. We are a national title insurance underwriter. I know, I'm in Iowa. You guys don't understand title insurance. I've been in this industry as a CISO for a couple of different companies for the last 16 years. So I live highly regulated every day. And then I have customers who are highly regulated who want to pass those requirements back down to me.
I am Paul Rice, and that means that fortunately we have both redundancy and resiliency in Paul's on the panel, so make sure you pick appropriately. Like Amy, I'm also an information security and privacy attorney, so for those who've been to my prior talks, Everything I say today is opinion and not legal advice. While I am a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, and I will not be speaking about any particular clients or matters. Happy to take questions, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Great. So first off, and again, this is sort of I don't want to say informal discussion, but it is a free-form discussion in some way. So we'll kick off with an exciting topic to start with, get everyone's thoughts, and then there are times that we're curious what you think. So this is going to be hopefully a little bit interactive. So starting off, we have AI. Topic, I'm sure we've, no one's, I don't think anyone's missed it. So we kind of wanted to talk about what's going on in the regulatory landscape, what's happening, how do we see the comparison between what's happening in the US and the EU. So Paul, I don't know if you want to start here, or I'm happy to talk about any of the state laws. I don't know if you want to start off with the EU.
I can go ahead
Okay.
and start if you like, and thank you, attorneys in the room, for reminding me that I too have disclaimers. Anything I say today is my opinion and mine alone, and not representative of the state of Wisconsin, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, nor the Federal Reserve Banks of Cleveland or Chicago, nor the Federal Reserve System, and I think that covers everyone. With that said, in the United States, regulation of artificial intelligence has been much talked about, but seldom seen, and is off to a slow, but in my opinion, fairly comprehensive start. AI has been talked about in a number of sectors which are data-driven, most notably financial services and energy, for many, many years, before it had the current moniker. And in the U.S. financial sector, actually, there's an important precursor, which is that as data modeling became increasingly important for financial institutions to learn how to manage risk, it would be about a decade ago that the regulators started to enunciate frameworks for what they called model risk management, which was really attempts to enforce stricter governance around statistical methods that are used for things like valuations and calculating capital in banks. And the roots of that go all the way back into the 1990s when two things were happening. We were trying to reduce the amount of capital held by large financial institutions and give them greater flexibility. And also derivatives in the trading space, derivatives were becoming important. And I vividly remember in the 1990s, we had a big international conference in the Fed trying to figure out how to regulate derivatives trading, in particular the kinds of risk calculations that were going into it. And I vividly remember Alan Greenspan walking to the podium and throwing up his hands and saying, "We have no idea how to do this." Things haven't changed a lot. But regulation got kick-started in the United States last year with Executive Order 14110 from the President, who basically, it's a long executive order with a lot of detail, but the gist of it is that the sector risk management agencies were ordered to consult experts in their respective sectors of the economy and figure out what the risks were related to AI, and essentially propose a comprehensive approach to how the industry and regulators would begin to identify specific risks and adjust to their regulatory programs appropriately. And this has been playing out. There were several specific things that they were enjoined to do. The Department of Energy was ordered to set up a test bed for evaluating AIs. And the Department of Commerce, via NIST, was ordered to come up with evaluative methods. And the NIST has now published a risk management framework for AI, which is very high level, but is the first step in getting organizations to start to think coherently about it. And this is something that we in the state of Wisconsin are taking seriously, because my little state agency has now also produced guidance on how to manage AI, so everybody's doing it. But that's what the EO is and does in a nutshell, and the idea here is to get the conversations going that will allow regulators in all of our critical infrastructure sectors that are heavily regulated to start by coming to consensus on definitions and risk profiles for the sector, and then to look at their regulations and guidance and see what needs to be adjusted. All right, thank you.
Yep. Bruce and Paul, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Well, I think it's the interesting thing to think about. AI is not new. We've been doing this since the 90s. We've been using machine learning. I'm going to steal something from Ira Winkler. It's just math. We've been using it forever. The interesting thing is it's gone mainstream in ChatGPT. Generative AI has really started to bring out thoughts in the public of what AI is, and now we have Terminator on the horizon. So we've been doing this for a long time and trying to navigate through how do you do this? What things should you have in place to be able to manage the risk of using an algorithm that you didn't write to make decisions that you're going to run your business on. So it's interesting that it's taken us this long to get to the point where people are starting to think about the regulatory requirements that we should have. I don't mind being heavily regulated. Sometimes they have no clue what they're doing, so you have to help educate them. But it helps us in trying to administer our risk. So it's not new, it's just the conversation is new, and those are the things we need to think about, and then understand what do we mean when we say AI, and how are we going to ensure that we have the right guardrails in place.
I'll just build on that from a regulatory standpoint. One of the important things that you can take away is for those of us who are either in or advising heavily regulated industries, that's where the regulations, the rules of the road are first going to be articulated, and they'll take today's general guidance and become the law of the land for whichever land you happen to be within. What that means is that much as we think about security and privacy today as being a set of rules that govern what you can and cannot do and under what conditions, that is what's going to happen with AI as well. We're going to have consensus opinion, both informed by the community, those of us in this room, and from the regulators and lawyers who are going to say this is an acceptable behavior, this is an unacceptable. And if you think about this writ large today, we're already seeing the cutting edge of AI regulation on things such as deep fakes in the political sphere or the personal sphere, and that's where the initial stakes are going to be set.
Yeah, okay. Thanks so much for these different perspectives. I can just quickly add, there is, I think I would start with understanding, if we zoom all the way out, understanding what's happening in the US, and I think it's helpful to compare to what's happening in the EU. So the EU has passed the EU AI Act. There's been a lot of talk about it. It's fairly comprehensive and stringent, significant fines. And I think what I wanted to kind of note is there is this concept in the EU with this act of a human rights approach to AI regulation, and it's reminiscent of, I'm sure people on this sitting here today, the data privacy discussions that were happening a few years ago. It was the same sort of thing where we were seeing a human rights approach to data privacy, AI regulation happening in Europe. And in the US, the approach has been, so far, it's very similar what we're seeing with AI to what we saw with data privacy. So consumer protection driven, we're thinking about fair business practices, and we're also, it's pretty sectoral right now, meaning that, so in the employment context, we've had a number of AI laws, and we've seen them. They've been in place for some time, and now we're slowly starting to see states like Utah and Colorado and California, which I want to get back to, pass AI laws, a lot around transparency. And so this is all to say, I think we're gonna see how the conversation evolves. I think it's tracking what we've been seeing with data privacy laws, and I think we're also going to potentially, it comes up, at least from my perspective, where I've seen it is when you're contracting with companies based in Europe, and in the U.S. this is a business, this is consumer protection and sort of a business practice, and there's not much negotiation around some of the data privacy terms, at least in the same way. So I think we may see it come up in this way, but just kind of wanted to point out what's going on overall, and then just a quick, I think we were talking about AI, and what's generating this sort of interest in it right now. I think, Bruce, you mentioned that. And just a quick note before we see if there's more on this. There was a California AI Safety Act that was vetoed very recently. And so, there's a discussion around a kill switch and requirements around a kill switch. And the conversation ultimately ended up being, how do we foster innovation and allow for innovation while maintaining safety? So do you want to add to that, Paul? Yeah.
I was going to riff on it.
Yeah.
I think the EU AI Act, which is now law, right?
Yes.
Goes into effect next year.
Yep.
There are some striking differences. Amy touched on a couple of those from a point of emphasis on legal perspective. The overwhelming emphasis on civil rights, for example, that is all through the EU document. A little more present, but a little more muted in the EO. But I wanted to highlight that Europe has now enunciated a regulatory regime. I forget the exact term, but there's provision in the document. Basically, if an AI is sufficiently large in terms of the number of computing cycles used to train and operate the model, then that concept is also present in the executive order, but it doesn't tell you to treat the AI any differently. It just says that you have to report its existence to the U.S. government. In Europe, a new regulatory regime is now being stood up to officially regulate these, and which means that they haven't written any rules yet. Oh, sorry, they haven't. No, you don't want to. Sorry, I get excited. They are essentially standing up new rules, and methods to take advantage of to require a lot of disclosure on how models are built and trained. And I made the joke earlier about Alan Greenspan not wanting to try to figure out derivatives trading. And this is going to be an important signal for how things proceed in the United States, whether the European authorities believe that they are going to be able to deterministically assess model risk with their own independent expertise. We might be sidling up to that in the United States. There actually are, there's no regulations on modeling in the use of statistical modeling methods in the financial sector, but there's a lot of guidance. The Fed wrote a letter in 2011, I want to say, offering guidance on how to manage, how to have effective governance over models. I bring all of this to your attention because what we're kind of dancing around from a cyber perspective is that my hot take on this is that we are about to see integrity take a huge step forward in importance when considering the CIA triad in your models. CISOs are going to get asked to put governance in place that's enforceable to manage these risks, these integrity risks. The introduction of bias in models, inaccuracies that can crop into the models. In the past, the people building the models have been entrusted to do this themselves. It's not clear to me that that's going to be possible with the stakes that are in play. And I would look to my colleagues for reaction.
No, I totally agree. And one of the challenges that we have, Once again, we're a title insurance company. Basically, we're an insurance company. We underwrite insurance. Today, we don't use AI to do this because there's challenges. If you underwrite insurance, you have to maintain all the work product that you use to make your underwriting decision. If you hand that off to an AI, how do you document all of that? How do you know that there was not a bias in the training set that says, I'm just not going to insure this protected class because I don't want to? And how do you prove that that doesn't exist? And that's where you get into, you can't just have people write the model and train the model without having good oversight on what they're using and then having the ability to see the reasons that were made when you made that decision. And that goes into just about anything you do in financial services.
I want to jump in and say that that's a great point, and we have precedent for trying to do this in terms of things like capital calculation in the financial sector. So big banks are now allowed to use math to determine how much capital they have to hold against the failure of their organization. And it interested me reading, Treasury had to write a paper, my old office actually, on how to tackle AI, regulation of AI, and they noted the risk. They noted inaccuracy as a risk, they noted bias as a risk, but they also noted, I forget the exact term they used, but the possibility that an organization may attempt to game the system and bring up internal AIs that are intended to produce analytic results that are actually biased toward a particular conclusion, in contrast to what they're supposed to actually do. And there are a number, that can be insider risk, and that can also be, frankly, corrupt governance. And so the regulator has to try to make both of those determinations. Well, how do you, in the past, what we did as regulators is we would go in and sit with the model developers and try to understand what they were doing. What we would look for is independent safeguards in their process for maintaining the model. And in particular was the model producing internal reports that would show that they would make a change in their model. It would have a predicted result. It would compare the actual result. And then what's the decision trail on how to keep running the model? So we're going to be asked to enforce this, and we're going to have, as cyber people, and we're going to be asked to put internal controls in place, similar to change management controls, that are going to allow, that are going to enforce sound governance, similar to how we do it in every other model. But that's got to work within the rubric of how we use AI. And here I'm only talking about models that are trained by the organization. What happens if part of what an information product does is simply outsourced to some other large language model, and you have no chance of doing any of that analysis. So that's a real pickle, and so it's going to be fascinating to me to see how the EU tackles that, because the risk is exactly the same in the EU, but I didn't see anything in the Act that talked about that particular risk. Maybe you did.
Yeah, and Paul and Bruce, I don't know if you have any thoughts before. I'm happy to add something.
I'll share a very quick thought, just riffing off what Paul said. What we've found in heavily regulated industries is the ongoing mantra of you can outsource a process, but you cannot outsource the risk of that process. What that means is that as an organization, you can have sub-processors, outside vendors, who will assist you with these sorts of things, but you're still expected as the primary organization to maintain responsibility, awareness, and control over that activity. And so practically looking out over the horizon of where I see things going from a US-EU standpoint and innovation is, when GDPR was passed, a number of us started negotiating new contracts with a data privacy or data protection addendum. That was our way to capture all of those elements necessary and required by GDPR. We're now seeing in the United States a general global addendum that covers those privacy obligations. I would not be surprised if, when we're sitting on this stage in 5 years from now, we're talking about DPAIs, where all of the terms and conditions, whether required by regulations or industry guidance, are documented amongst the parties.
Yeah, great point. And I think you're probably, so these are sort of, Paul, you're talking about regulatory and legal requirements. What about transparency? I think we've touched upon it, and I think, but then Paul, to right next to me, you mentioned sort of the role of integrity that is coming, that's really coming to light here. But what do we think about transparency? Are we concerned? So I bring this up because in the U.S., as some more context, the laws that are not what I'm calling sectoral, so that are not just focused on employment or one area, the ones that we have in place are concerned about making sure the user knows that they're interacting with generative AI, for example. So we have, Colorado is not yet in effect, going to effect 2026. California, even though the AI safety law was vetoed, there is a transparency law that is also going into effect, that is still there, going to effect in 2026. And we have a Utah law that is in effect, that is concerned with transparency. So that seems to be on the mind, that's what we're seeing passing, and I'm just curious if you had any thoughts around, is that where we need to be focused on? What does that mean? Just any quick thoughts, and I can share mine.
Actually, I was confused as to which Paul you were addressing, or?
Oh, both.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you
Yes.
like to go first? Oh, you want me to go first? Or you want to go first?
I can briefly comment and just say that as Amy is discussing, one of the key concepts from FTC regulation is making sure that practices are not unfair or deceptive, which means that there's clear, conspicuous disclosures. And I believe, but anyone is welcome to check my references, I believe California was one of the first states that passed a law requiring disclosure of AI-assisted chatbots. And that's what often leads to that banner that says, by the way, you'll be talking to an AI at first, and you may be talking to a human operator later, but those sorts of transparency requirements are getting baked into so many things.
That is, yeah, and to maybe riff on that, I'll talk a little bit about what we're struggling with right now at Wisconsin DPI. We enforce FERPA regulation, for free education. I don't even remember what it stands for, but it's the law that protects the right of parents to control what information is shared about their children. And we enforce that. For anybody who wants to do business with a school or make use of that data. So we review every contract, or rather every data privacy agreement that we feel needs to be imposed on a vendor who is handling student data. And the way it works is everything revolves around the need to disclose who is touching data in the course of an application operating. That includes how it's outsourced. But we are starting to see contracts crop up that essentially will say, we are using the data and we are acting in scholastic interest and therefore have the right to process the data without having to get parents' permission to do so. But then you look at the product and you can see evidence that there's a back-end AI, and that means that data is being shared with a back-end AI. And so we go to the vendor and say, there's provision in FERPA for a chain of data protection agreements that go turtles all the way down to be able to protect against nth party risk. So I see evidence of, Claude being used behind this thing. You got an agreement with those guys? Crickets. Yeah. And that's going to be a problem. That data is going somewhere, and the provenance of data, the financial sector paper on AI talked about how the chief data officer is going to be a whole lot more important in many organizations, but at the same time, they're going to be powerless to deal with embedded use of generative AI. And speculatively, I wonder if the EU has not already come to that conclusion, and that's why they are going to directly regulate systemic AIs.
Now, how things come together. Now we've just moved into third-party risk management. Because now you need to understand what your nth party within this chain is using as technology to do whatever services they're doing. And if it's an AI, you need to know about their AI, what they're using, how they're using it, what the governance around the data is, how are they using your data to train? Are they using your data to make decisions for other people? You need to now really start taking a look at another whole issue with third-party risk management, and it's hard in the first place, but now we're adding another layer of hard.
Which I will add, as far as I know, is not explicitly required by any regulator at present. Nth party.
That's true.
Yeah, OCC tried a few years back. They couldn't get the rule through.
They're still trying.
Yeah, they're still trying. Yeah.
Maybe as a last couple of questions on AI. There's so much in all of this that we could talk about before moving on to, yeah. So actually, this is where we would love to hear, what are people grappling with in terms of AI, whether it's AI use, we talked about AI policies as we were preparing for this. What are sort of the questions or issues coming up, if anyone in the audience wants to share? Sure, and I'll quickly repeat the question. I'll summarize it, repeat it, so everyone, if you couldn't hear it. The question is, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. Osi is asking what can cybersecurity professionals, IT and cybersecurity professionals, do to educate the public on what AI is. So maybe just to go off of that, we talked we've been talking, are we accounting for all the risks, and at the same time, it seems like your question is saying, are some of the discussions around unfounded fears of Skynet? So any responses?
Yeah, so the first thing is limit the term. AI is a very, very, very broad topic. We've been using AI for years in the form of machine learning. But really what we need to do as far as educating consumers and our employees is, when you say AI, what do you mean? So do you mean a chatbot? What is a chatbot? A chatbot is nothing more than a set of algorithms that can answer standard questions, and if they've seen the question before and the answer, and then if it can't, then it will hand you to a human. And that's how you start educating what it does and limit the scope so that you don't get into that Skynet discussion, right? What does a large language model, what does ChatGPT do? ChatGPT doesn't do anything special. If you have the time, you can do everything that ChatGPT does. It just does it faster. You ask it a question, it goes to a whole body of knowledge and sees if it has something that it can help you answer that with. So the use of AI is not to take over the world, it's to ease your job or answer your questions faster than you could yourself. But you can do everything you can do in AI today as a human. And so that's really how you do it. Limit the scope to what you really want them, what you're using, and educate them that it's just a tool to assist you, that you could actually do all of this yourself, but it would just take you 10 times longer.
Any other thoughts? I'm gonna switch.
I would augment that answer by saying you're asking a great question, because in preparing for this, I read a bunch of the agency papers that were produced by the executive order, and it will surprise nobody familiar with the operations of the United States government that there was no consensus on definitions. In fact, in Treasury's paper, they noted that every financial institution we talked to also had a different definition. And they themselves are frustrated by that, because then they go to experts in academia and industry who also give them different definitions. We have a real baseline problem, and I suppose we all will look to NIST to solve this over the next few years. But
The last presentation, we don't think we know what cybersecurity is. I know we don't know what AI is. There is no definition.
which makes it awful tough to explain it to the public and to your staff.
Yeah.
You want a mic?
Don't fall.
No, that would hurt me.
Yeah, better hit the gate.
Can y'all hear me? Thank you. I have a legal question. We talked about nth party dependency just now. Where do you think we should be drawing the line? The provenance, the lineage, all of it is important, but how deep should we go? What's more practical? How would you implement it even in your organizations?
You had two things. What's practical and how deep should we go? Two different answers, right? What's practical isn't very deep, because it just gets, muddier the farther you go. How deep should we go? It depends on what that third party, fourth party, fifth party is actually doing for you, and what risks it brings to the organization. So I think that's one of the challenges that the OCC had when they started to talk about nth party. How deep can you go, and what's practical? And I don't know if anyone has the answer to that. Right now, I like to go fourth party. I don't necessarily have the capabilities of always doing that.
I'll just add that I've had the same experience, that you find that there's diminishing returns after a while when doing this for your application, for your vendor base. But where I am now in K-12 education, with respect to parental permission for student data sharing, FERPA explicitly says you follow the chain until it ends. So if there's, fifth and sixth and seventh and eighth parties, you have to follow it. So,
Just pulling back from that concept in FERPA, which is absolutely present, and making it more general, is this notion of waterfall or flow down requirements. So while it may not be practical to conceive at the start of a business relationship about all the places where data may eventually go, there are provisions and techniques that can be used in contracts where you say things such as no less stringent than the requirements present here, and that they must apply to all parties in the chain, wherever and how deep the chain may go.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tom. I actually have an AI company. But what's your perspective on the importance of open source AI and the open source developer community in terms of driving innovation as compared to the folks that are for the closed models and regulation? What's sort of the balance there, or the value, pros and cons between regulating an AI and the open source community that's going full steam ahead?
Now you want to drag in open source.
We build our platforms entirely on open source. And,
Yeah, I know, and so everyone uses open source. We use open source. And the previous speaker brought up, just because it's open source does not mean everyone is looking at it from a security standpoint. And it's generally the opposite. You know, I ran development teams for years. And the answer I always got when I would do something to see how the application would respond is if it didn't respond the way the developer didn't think, they would chastise me for doing something that they didn't think about. And it's like, the answer is always, well, it's not supposed to do that. The problem with open source, you have no guarantee that that level of rigor that says, I've just built this thing. No one's really looking at it from a security standpoint because now they're off to something else. And the next person that looks at it isn't going to go look at it to see if it's secure, if it uses good coding practices. They're going to go, for this use case, it works, I'm going to use it. And so you don't know what's in it. And that's my problem with open source. And the closer the open source gets to managing data that I'm responsible for, that's where I get more nervous.
So if we could, I'm sure there are more questions in the audience. There's, Paul, do you want to try, we want to grab one more, or do we want to try to get to? Okay.
I wanted to add, Paul, that the open source initiatives and the open source movement is also temperable. Regulation's all fine and it's good, it's welcomed. But we saw with the SSH libs LZMA bug, that took 1.5 years for the legal execution and inclusion of that backdoor source code into SSH that would have wreaked havoc around the world. And until you have that level of deep insight into regulation and into your open source, good luck to you.
Oh yeah, I mean, we could dig into open source a long time. You know, if I'm an attacker and I want to get a backdoor into major corporations, I find a good, highly used open source tool and I attack that. Because the likelihood of that open source tool, that problem being detected, generally it will not be detected until after it causes the follow-on problem. I have nothing against open source. It's a great concept. The implementation makes me nervous. They're developers. They don't want to, you know, they want fast. Why do they want fast? Nothing against developer. I'm a former developer. I understand. We got to operate at the speed of the business. AI has me concerned, not because it's AI, because it increases the speed of the business and it increases the expectation of the business owner to deliver things faster, and speed kills. Absolutely, but I'm going to counter that with this. Business owners are not Formula One drivers. They are there to generate revenue as quickly and as much as they can. We need to put the guardrails in place. If we don't, they're going to drive off the track every day. And they do it all the time. That's why we have shadow IT, because we're not fast enough. They want to go faster. They're going to find a way to do it. AI is just going to help speed that up.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna just quickly, these are all such great points, and I'm worried that people won't be able to hear the mic. So maybe we do a poll. Do we want to continue, maybe we pass the mic on and take more questions, or you can hear about regulatory harmonization and what's going on with the patchwork of regulations. So any thoughts on the panel? I want to hand you a mic, I think, if, I'm not sure if everyone can hear. Yeah. Okay, let me go hand you the mic. I think is a,
Hi, I'm Tom Bendine. I actually ran the AI workshop yesterday. And so... Hi, hey, boss. Yeah. So I absolutely agree with what the gentleman, I didn't catch your name, but what the gentleman was saying, absolutely. The key, I call this the impetus from the business, the AI carrot, right? The AI carrot is out there. We're all looking for it for productivity improvement, new service creation. All the work I've been doing the last 12 months with all of this, working with some CISO people, is we absolutely need to figure out how to provide governing principles to this, because there's a lot of gray areas, a lot of ambiguity. We need to understand where the regulations are going, because they're also very ambiguous and unenforceable in many regards. So the way I sort of counsel organizations to say, treat this just like enterprise software. It's very compelling enterprise software. It's like going from the fax and the typewriter to email. It's the same kind of thing, but it's just going so fast, and the benefits can be so compelling that the security professionals have that role to play. They need to put their stake in the ground and say, hey guys, I need observability, I need proper authentication, I need an immutable audit trail, right? I need two-factor, and I think I mentioned. So we should just look at it and say, listen, we need to treat this as enterprise software, apply the same treatments, and we need to educate our security professionals, educate our users, educate the business, and say, because the impact of things going wrong there is so much faster and can be so much worse than other software tools that are out there. So that's just my posture, right? And so what I've done with my company and what we've done to build these solutions, which you can actually see, we have a demo just right out there. I'll just show you that. We have, I think, most of those things addressed. And the guys that are actually building our software are working for Airbus, and we're using the same software as they're using at Airbus. So it's a very, very responsible, ethical group of guys that I have working for me, and we do the things that you're speaking of. But I would agree that there are a lot of developers that are creating projects that are very compelling without the proper security treatments for the software. So I'm not trying to be confrontational, but I just want to counter that there are responsible AI companies and developers out there that are doing this the right way, coming from enterprise IT backgrounds, right? So.
and I think I'm going to just quickly add, part of AI governance, one of the sort of reasons for it and the motivations is that it differentiates companies, and I've talked about it as a business differentiator before, and here's there are companies that do responsible AI, and you can see the difference between,
And I would just, if I may share again briefly, the big gap I'm seeing right now with AI is the lack of observability, the lack of the audit trail. I see a lot of companies connect into OpenAI's API and Bedrock and all these guys, and they have no observability tools. They have no event log archives. They don't know what documents are being sent in there. They have no way of governing any of that or getting observability. So I think that's an area that all these organizations really need to pick up on.
I want to respond to that too, because what you're saying is what I've certainly suspected, and I'm kind of finding, which is that we're going to be asked in the cyber community to enforce sound data governance in this environment. And what I just heard you say is the tools are simply not present at all in most enterprises to be able to do that.
I would say the tools
baseline tools.
I would say the problem, the tools are there, the SIMs are there, the observability tools are there. The problem is getting logs. The problem is that people are connecting to these APIs at OAI and all these other guys, but they're not putting it through a proxy gateway or anything and scraping the logs and understanding what documents are being pushed in there. That's the problem. There's nothing magical about this. It's just the way that these guys are under pressure.
You're 100% correct.
Yeah.
AI is just another piece of software. That's all it is. It is enterprise software if you're using it in the enterprise. You have to use the same governance principles that you use today for managing any software project. The problem is it's fast, it's a buzzword, people want to use it. It really does make a business difference. The challenge is how do we do the governance around that when you don't have the observability that you need to have. So, it's not like saying, you can't use AI. We use AI every day. We limit the use of AI to those things that we don't need that level of observability on. And when we finally get there, then we'll get to the point where we're going to say, okay, you can make these other types of decisions once you can prove how that decision was made. That's the transparency piece that we sort of talked about. When I look at transparency, it's not just making sure the consumer knows that we're using AI, but making sure we know why AI made a decision that it made, so we can then have a defensible position. See, I do listen to lawyers once in a while.
Yeah, so thank you. I would invite you to come and see our running platform where you'll see all this stuff. But the good news is those tools are out there. The problem is that it's happened so fast. There's so few AI skills in the community right now. We need to do a lot more education. And that's also something I'm working on actively, right, with all the things I'm doing. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is there's a lot of there's so many topics within just even saying the word AI. So and I think you mentioned this gentleman mentioned a question that I'm just going to pose open-ended, and it sounds like it might be a question for the rest of the day, which was, what is the role of the CISO? I heard you mention in all of this, and so with that, I'll leave that open-ended. Paul, Bruce, and Paul, do you want to talk about the patchwork of laws, or I'm happy to move on to that. We have a few minutes.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
So there's good news and bad news. The good news is that the Office of the National Cyber Director last year was asked by the President to tackle regulatory harmonization. Yes. And so the last year an RFI was issued by the ONCD asking in every critical infrastructure sector for the essentially for the major players they issue a request for information for people to talk about what they saw as the risks of a lack of harmonization, and this is specific to cyber, I should say. And the risks and the benefits and the barriers that they saw. So they received over 2,000 comments and have now plowed through them, and in June issued essentially a progress report which summarizes all of the comments. It's a fascinating document. If you are really interested in how sausage is made, it is worth a read. But the bad news is that although it seems to be a lot of industries are generally acknowledging that different, diverse regulations are creating a huge amount of unnecessary cost. And challenges, and there are certainly standardization work by NIST and others is helping to alleviate this burden as more and more regulators converge on federal standards, existing federal standards as a baseline for what they're doing. The problem that arises is that those baselines don't actually apply universally, and you still have this big problem is that different industries are different. Financial institutions have processed transactions. The defense industry base builds airplanes and has factory floors. And, where I work, we teach kids. And they're all different, and the systems are different, and that means the controls are different. And they don't necessarily yet map up to a universal approach. So that's kind of where we stand. Amy and I were talking about this and observing that one of the big challenges with harmonization, what you ultimately have to do is produce enough of a model of the necessary legislation to achieve greater harmonization that you can then propose the language to every legislature at the same time. I don't know, they are making progress toward doing that. That is the ultimate end goal of this effort, to be able to assist whoever is president next year with being able to think about how they would take forward legislation to actually reduce this. I would note that this has actually been tried in the insurance industry. The NAIC, several years ago, you may be able to speak to this, actually put together model cybersecurity legislation, and that's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And I had the catbird seat on this at Treasury. I watched him do it. Put out, convened all of the different commissioners, came up with model legislation, put it out to the state governments. I think 24 of the states considered it.
I think there are 13 that have implemented
13
the NAIC model law. There's about another 8 that are considering it. Oh, by the way, they're not all the same.
Yeah, and they made changes. Getting legislatures to do the same thing at the same time is enormously difficult. I don't know where we're going to end up. I think this patchwork is going to remain with us for the foreseeable future. But I did want to note that a lot of times good things come out of these sorts of efforts. I think there is hope that we can see some convergence on at least compatible regulatory regimes, where people are not asked to do two opposite things.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of things. It's not all the same across industries, so it makes it really hard to make it homogeneous across all of them. And if you do, then you end up with the least common denominator, which is not necessarily the best. I think the NAIC model law, I love the model that they used, and even though of the states that have actually implemented it, there are differences. The differences are actually very minor, and it's about the exemptions to the law and what your revenue is and how many employees you have, because there are specific differences between, you know, say New York and West Virginia, you know, just because. And so they've taken a really, I think it's a good template for trying to come up with a better framework for regulations across industries. But we'll see if we can ever use that.
Okay. Well, I think we're at time, and maybe I'll check Paul all the way to my left. Was there anything that you want to add? Otherwise, I can talk about the attempts on the data privacy side to pass a federal law.
I'll just very quickly summarize the statements my fellow panelists are making, where harmonization leads to standardization, but in any area we're seeing innovation at the individual regulatory standpoint, and that's where these differences rise. And sometimes there are benefits, and sometimes there are detriments to that. But certainly, I think harmonization across the industries coming from the federal government is a net good, because it ensures that that innovation within that model is directed.
Yeah, and I guess I'll add, there's been just as almost an example in all of this. Another one, we've seen a patchwork of data privacy laws across the U.S., state by state, and again, a difference between, we started out talking about differences between what we were seeing in the EU and in the U.S. There's a much more centralized approach we've seen both with AI regulation and with data privacy. So U.S., we've had state by state. We do think of states as laboratories of democracy, and so that there's that rationale behind it. But recently we saw the American Privacy Rights Act. We are looking, we'll see if it goes into effect. It's a federal data privacy law to address the patchwork. I think the one thing, without getting into it too much, the one thing I want to note is the patchwork also affects, I think it's interesting to think about which companies can comply with the patchwork versus a federal law. So, if you're a large company, so there'll be a threshold. So among the companies within the threshold, large companies may be most able to comply with different regulations across different states, and changing, being able to cross-work those regulations, but then also being able to have those different compliance measures. And so the effect of a patchwork on companies that are right above that threshold but not large enough to have all the resources to do that kind of compliance, I think is another consideration as we talk about.
Well, even large companies, I used to work with a Fortune 500 in the same industry I'm in right now. We were regulated by 50 different states' departments of insurance. I'm very familiar with the NAIC. And it's a really good concept, but they meet every 5 years to true up. So every 5 years, you have to learn what you need to do. And then every state is different for the next 5 years. And then you get GLP and you get SOX and you start going layering the regulations. I don't think we're ever going to see a set of federal regulations that we can all agree upon. But frankly, we do over 400 audits a year. I would love to have one.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you would support insurance regulation at the federal level?
Yes.
Wow.
Just because the complexity of doing it every state. It's
you're not wrong,
complex.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to, the point that both of you made, which is that you have to, regulations fall unfairly on entities of large, medium, and small scale is absolutely true, and I don't expect as a former regulator to get sympathy from anybody, but one thing that makes writing the regulations really challenging, and I have written several, is that you have to write language that is one size fits all, but it's going to be interpreted in the right way for the big fish and the little fish and everybody in between, and that's a well-nigh impossible task. But we have learned in the past that when we try to do tiered regulation, it just somebody ends up being under-regulated, and then they get hit, because the fact is that strong regulation does make organizations more resilient.
What I believe, we will have the system we have now. We will have this level of complexity, especially if you're doing business across the U.S. and then you add Europe. You're not going to have a one-size-fits-all. You're not going to be able to redo everything that you do. So it becomes an operational issue.
Yep.
Because I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we can write a regulation that fits all of the differences, even across just state, not counting county and municipal and all the other things that need to go in between.
Yeah, and so state, municipal, industry sort of guidelines and enforcement that sometimes, frameworks that have teeth sometimes. So the patchwork is on multiple levels. And Paul, I don't know if you had a point, and then I think we probably are getting ready to wrap up, and so I can.
We did.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point, this is a conference of cybersecurity practitioners. So I wanted to be careful to bottom line all of this legal and policy and regulatory discussion for you guys. You just heard my colleagues say, things are, generally speaking, probably going to stay the same in terms of the complexity of regulation and adherence to it. I would argue that they will probably slowly grow. We will probably see a gradual increase in the number of regulated entities in the United States and the degree of regulation simply to manage these complexities. But if you're an engineer, expect to be, well, first of all, if you're a risk person, expect to be putting in place new forms of governance. We talked about AI, and it has profound consequences for data governance and for third-party risk management. Those things are going to become a lot more important quickly. And that means your risk people need to learn how to manage the risks. Your leadership is going to, the CISOs are going to have to figure out what effective governance is and get it done in the organization. You're going to have to get more and more nimble at assessing third-party risk and vendors and having, a stronger understanding of the data passing over your perimeters, to the extent there is a perimeter anymore. And if you're an engineer, you're going to have to build access management around this and accountability around this. And if you're if you're doing threat hunting or pen testing in this increasingly diverse environment, your job just got more complicated. And this stuff does impact the resources that need to be allocated in a security program. And I would certainly tell anybody who might consider themselves more of a technical person, a skills-based hacker, or in your organizations or as a service provider, you do have to understand this stuff so that you understand the direction that the industry is heading and adapt and hone your skills to continue to be valuable.
Okay. Any other final thoughts as we?
What he said.
I think I just mentioned maybe 15 minutes earlier about what is the role of the CISO, I think was a question that came from the audience. And it sounds like maybe something else to add to this is sort of the compliance and operations have always been, there's always been a connection, but they're becoming more and more intertwined. Perhaps in compliance operations is playing a larger role.
Yeah, and as we talked about, data governance and third-party risk management are only going to get more important. Yes. There are organizations that do not have executive-level roles in these areas, but they will. And it'll be somebody's job in smaller and smaller organizations where it wasn't before. And as security people, we need to adapt the program to acknowledge those realities.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you.